Now, each year, thousands of triathletes start their season with one goal in mind, and that's to get themselves to the Ironman World Championships in Hawaii.
Yeah, it is one of the toughest events in the world for triathletes to train for and earn a spot at. So how do you get to Kona?
The Ironman World Championships takes place in Kailua Kona on Hawaii in October of every year.
Yeah, and what better way to celebrate than to don our new Kona Edition GTN t-shirts for this year's Ironman World Championships in Hawaii. If you'd like to get your hands on one of these very nice t-shirts, if you ask me, you can pre-order them by heading on over to our GTN shop, and the link for that is on screen somewhere right now.
Yeah, but let's get back to getting to Kona, as it were. Now, every year there is approximately 100,000 people competing around the world to get to Kona. There are only 2,500 or 2,400 athletes that are able to compete in Kona. So given that's only just over 2% of the total number of people who are racing each year, that's obviously not that many, and it means that it is, well, a heck of an achievement to get yourself there.
On that note, let's discuss the qualification process, because every full distance Ironman event has on offer a minimum of one qualification or one slot for the Ironman World Championships per age group category. Now, there are additional slots on offer that are then divided up according to the size of the age group categories. For example, the 35 to 39 and the 40 to 44 age group categories tend to be the most popular, have the most competitors in them, and therefore the most slots. So in that case, you don't necessarily have to be the winner of that age group category to actually get yourself a slot.
Now, in 2019, the races with the most spots were regional championships, which were held in Frankfurt, Cairns, South Africa, Texas, and in Argentina. Now, just because these races have more spots doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a greater chance of qualifying, because by default, usually those extra number of spots usually means that the competition is going to be that much fiercer. So do bear in mind the fact that these slot numbers can change from year to year, so before you hit that registration button, do a little bit of research.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, to throw a little bit of a curveball in there are a few shorter Ironman 70.3 events that you can also qualify from. We've got Ironman 70.3 Hawaii, Shanghai, Xiamen, and Lesu. Now, this qualification process is where the main bulk of slots is taken from. But that is not the only way that you can get yourself to the World Championships, because we also have the Ironman Legacy Program and the auction. Now, the Ironman Legacy Program is now in its 8th year, and it rewards the most loyal Ironman athletes with a chance to go to the Ironman World Championships. Now, to be eligible, you have to have completed 12 Ironmans, or a minimum of 12 Ironmans. You must never have been to the Ironman World Championships, or at least competed at the Ironman World Championships. You must have completed an Ironman in the last 2 years and also be entered for an Ironman in the current year. And this year, Ironman have 175 legacy slots taken for Kona.
And then we've got the auction process, where there's 5 slots that are auctioned off on a weekly basis, and this goes on eBay. The first 4 of those slots, well, they started being auctioned in April, and they all benefited the Ironman Foundation Community Fund. The 5th and final slot, that was benefiting the Women for Tri program. Now, the slots do start with a minimum bid of $25,000 US, so they're not very cheap, but they are all for very good causes. The Women for Tri program also offers another additional female triathlete the opportunity to go to Kona if they embody what they call the spirit of triathlon. There are 5 further slots which are drawn from around the world for physically challenged athletes. There are also 25 slots in what they call the Executive Challenge, which brings together top performing execs who can all race in Kona. And finally, there are a number of military division slots which have been available this year at a couple of events.
But as I've said already, most people's routine is actually through the qualification process, which is definitely no easy task. But as if the training and racing wasn't hard enough, then we have things like kit, getting ourselves there, staying there, and things like that to worry about. So I'm gonna actually throw this one to you, Fraser, having raced there a few times already. What do we need to consider with Kona?
Yeah, Mark, you're right. Kona is, well, it's entirely unique for, well, a multitude of different reasons actually, but first and foremost, we have to consider the conditions over there in the Big Island. Temperature for a start is hovering somewhere between 80 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit, so roughly 27 to 35 degrees Celsius, so just really hot. Plus, and this is the killer as far as I'm concerned, the humidity is hovering around about something like 90% virtually the whole time. And this heat and mugginess, to make things even worse for us as athletes when you're out there racing, is generally it is worth between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, which is where an awful lot of athletes are still very much mid-race or out there on the run.
Yeah, that is crazy humidity. So how do you prep for something like that?
Yeah, well, that's another good question, Mark. And an awful lot of the pros and some other fortunate folks might manage to get themselves abroad and go and find similar conditions to try and replicate what they're going to be racing in. Others will just get themselves indoors and really crank up the heat inside to try and, again, get that sort of muggy and humidity feeling. Others, well, they might just be hoping for the best. But I would definitely recommend trying to do that at home and just get the heating fired really high to just see if you can replicate those tough conditions.
Okay, so with all that in mind, is there anything to consider kit-wise that differs?
Well, firstly, there is a lot of chat about the winds in Kona, so that's something to consider first and foremost in terms of what you use out there on the bike. The winds in Hawaii are very famous for getting up to as much as 60 miles an hour or something like 90-95 kilometers an hour at their gustiest, and thankfully I never, touch wood, managed to ride in those sort of horrible winds, but it's a possibility. So on that reason alone, no disc wheels are allowed in Kona, so you can't have those. And also an awful lot of athletes just decide to opt for shallower wheel sets, particularly on their front wheel, because that just helps you avoid getting any sort of twitches on the bike because of those winds.
Okay, so what about with your clothing choices? Anything change there?
Yeah, well, again, I think you want to be able to have the feeling of being a lot more cool because of the heat. So I always try to opt for lighter color fabrics, would veer away from anything that was darker colored, just so that you're reflecting that heat rather than the sun getting absorbed into the dark colors. I also always like to opt for a 2-piece, but that was personal preference, and I just felt that was a little bit more ventilation and felt a little bit cooler. But things are moving on in terms of aerodynamics these years, so possibly if I was going back, I might look into using a 1-piece these days. But yeah, you definitely want to think about clothing choice too.
Okay, and I guess the other big question, there's a big topic for debate on, is the helmet. So what helmet would you normally go?
Yeah, you're right, Mark, because you really feel like you're just kind of boiling inside a TT helmet. And not to say a lot of people don't quite happily use a TT helmet. You'd always want to use, I would say, a white one. Again, it just feels like that's going to be cooler. But in terms of helmet choice, I always liked an Aero Road helmet. There's an awful lot of athletes even just go for a bog standard road helmet. In fact, Chrissy Wellington and Craig Alexander famously won Kona using just that.
Okay, so this definitely isn't your ordinary race. That's all the kit discussed and sorted, but what about actually getting yourself there?
Yeah, now the big thing about Hawaii is the accommodation, because Kona, or Kailua Kona, the town itself isn't really that big, so accommodation can get snapped up really quite far in advance, and if you don't manage to get that booked up as early as you can, obviously some people are qualifying a lot closer to the race, but it can become very expensive, or you're just going to end up having to be quite far out of town, which is not as easy for logistics coming in and out during the race week.
Yeah, and it is obviously a great atmosphere there,
Yeah.
so a lot of people really do want to be in that town. Now, given the uniqueness of this event and how brutal it is, a lot of athletes actually try to get out there a little bit earlier on, don't they?
Yeah, they do, because of course you got a long time zone to try and get over and adapt to, but as a pro, I was lucky. I always managed to get there at least 2 weeks before, which is a long time. Some pros are out there for even longer just to try and adapt because they're able to. For a lot of amateurs and age groupers, they're trying to get there a week, or if they're lucky, maybe up to 2 weeks before, but that can obviously be rather tricky with work.
Yeah, now this is obviously an absolutely amazing event. I haven't raced it, but I've been there in person and definitely soaked it all in, and it is absolutely incredible. If it is on your bucket list or a goal for you, we do hope that you manage to get yourself there someday. But one little suggestion for you is that there is so many exciting things going on there, so much fun to be had, but try not to get caught up in too much of it, because it isn't that conducive to a great performance on race day.
What, doing your mile reps up and down a Leahy Drive the day before the race? No?
Looks great, but yeah, we don't suggest it. If you have enjoyed today's video, it's been of use for you, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you'd like to see more from GTN, just click on the globe and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to see our Kona in numbers video, you can see that by clicking just down here.
Yeah, and then we have a Kona behind the scenes video, which you can get here.